The executive boardroom of Skybridge Airlines looked more like a courtroom than a place where business deals were made. A 40-foot wall of glass overlooked the city skyline, while polished black marble reflected the cold white lights hanging above the table. 12 executives sat in silence, pretending to study their tablets even though every eye in the room kept drifting toward Ethan Cole. At the far end of the table, CEO Adrian Cross adjusted the cuff of his expensive suit before sliding a thin folder across the glass surface. The folder stopped directly in front of Ethan. "You know what this is," Adrian said calmly. Ethan didn't touch it. "If this is another restructuring proposal, send it to legal." A faint laugh escaped from one of the board members, but it disappeared the moment Adrian looked his way. "This isn't restructuring," Adrian replied. "It's your termination." The room went completely still. Beside Adrian sat Vanessa Hart, Ethan's fiancée and one of the airline's youngest finance directors. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. She hadn't spoken a single word since the meeting started. Ethan finally opened the folder. Inside was a formal accusation letter claiming he had concealed unauthorized financial transfers connected to the airline's merger contracts. He read the first page twice. Then he slowly looked up. "You're accusing me of fraud." Adrian leaned back comfortably. "Not just fraud. Obstruction, abuse of authority, and violation of aviation compliance standards." "That's impossible, is it?" Adrian pressed a button on the remote beside him. The giant screen behind the boardroom lit up with transaction records, copied emails, and internal audit summaries. Every document carried Ethan's authorization code. Several executives shifted uneasily. Ethan stared at the screen, confused for only a second before realization hit him. Someone had copied his credentials. "This was fabricated," he said firmly. Adrian folded his hands. "Careful, Ethan. Calling company evidence fake is a serious statement." Ethan ignored him and turned toward Vanessa. Her eyes stayed lowered. "That hurt more than the accusations." "Vanessa," he said quietly, "tell them." Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Adrian answered for her. "She already did." Ethan felt his chest tighten. "For months," Adrian continued, "you protected her reckless financial decisions. We gave both of you opportunities to cooperate internally, but instead you buried the evidence." "That's a lie." "Then why did the transfers route through your department?" Ethan's jaw clenched. "Because he had approved emergency overrides during the merger. Because Vanessa had panicked after discovering irregularities in the fuel contracts. Because he trusted the company would investigate honestly. Instead, they built a trap around him." One of the board members cleared his throat nervously. "Adrian, perhaps we should postpone public termination until legal reviews everything." "There's nothing left to review," Adrian interrupted sharply. "The damage to shareholder confidence is already severe." He looked directly at Ethan. "You're done here." Two security guards appeared outside the boardroom doors. The humiliation was deliberate. Ethan rose slowly from his chair. The movement echoed through the silent room. He looked at Vanessa again. This time she finally raised her eyes toward him. There were tears in them. But beneath the fear, Ethan noticed something else. Terror, not guilt. As he collected the termination folder, Adrian stood and straightened his tie with a satisfied smile. "You should have learned something about aviation after all these years," the CEO said. Ethan paused near the door. "What's that?" Adrian's expression hardened with cruel amusement. "Never crash for someone who'd never save you." For a brief second, anger flashed across Ethan's face. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Not the smile of a defeated man. The smile of someone who had just understood the entire game. He folded the termination letter carefully and slipped it into his coat pocket before looking back at the boardroom one final time. "You just made the biggest mistake in this company's history," he said quietly. And as the doors closed behind him, Vanessa finally broke down crying while Adrian's confident smile slowly began to fade. 3 weeks after his public firing from Skybridge Airlines, Ethan Cole was living in a cramped apartment on the edge of the city, far from the luxury high-rises where airline executives spent their evenings drinking champagne and discussing profits. The place smelled faintly of dust and burnt coffee, and the only light came from 3 computer monitors glowing across a cluttered kitchen table. Stacks of printed reports covered nearly every surface in the room. Flight manifests, Fuel invoices, aircraft maintenance logs, internal audit summaries. Most people would have seen meaningless paperwork. Ethan saw patterns. His eyes moved across the screens as lines of encrypted company data decrypted one file at a time. He barely slept anymore. Every hour uncovered another inconsistency hidden deep inside Skybridge's systems. At first, he thought Adrian Cross simply wanted him removed from the company. Now he realized the corruption went far deeper. Entire maintenance contracts had been fabricated through shell companies. Millions of dollars were routed offshore through fake repair vendors. Aircraft marked as fully inspected had skipped critical safety checks before international departures. Ethan leaned back in his chair, exhausted, rubbing his eyes. If this gets out, he muttered to himself, Skybridge collapses overnight. But the part that disturbed him most wasn't the stolen money. It was Vanessa. He opened another encrypted folder labeled V, Heart. Inside were dozens of internal messages between Vanessa and Adrian. The first few looked harmless: budget discussions, merger planning, compliance approvals. Then the tone changed. Threats, manipulation, pressure. One message made Ethan's stomach tighten. Approve the revised numbers or I'll make sure the board sees your private audit access logs. Another read. You work for me now. Don't forget that. Ethan stared at the screen silently. Vanessa hadn't betrayed him. She'd been cornered. A sudden knock at the apartment door shattered the silence. Ethan froze instantly. Nobody knew where he was staying. The knock came again, louder this time. Slowly, he reached beneath the table and grabbed the small metal baseball bat he kept nearby. Years in corporate aviation had taught him one thing: powerful people became dangerous when exposed. He approached the door carefully and looked through the peephole. Vanessa stood outside in the pouring rain. Her hair was soaked, her makeup smeared, and her hands trembled as she hugged her coat tightly around herself. Ethan opened the door halfway but didn't speak. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Then Vanessa finally whispered, "They know you're investigating." Ethan's expression hardened. Who? Adrian's people. She stepped inside quickly and glanced nervously toward the street behind her. They followed me for 2 days. I had to leave my phone at the airport just to lose them. Ethan locked the door immediately. Vanessa looked around the apartment at the mountains of documents scattered everywhere. You found everything, she said softly. Not everything. Her eyes filled with tears. I never meant for this to happen. Ethan stayed silent. Vanessa wiped her face with shaking hands. Adrian threatened me after the merger audit. I discovered payments linked to aircraft inspections that never happened. When I questioned him, her voice cracked. He said he'd destroy my career. Then he said he'd destroy yours too. Ethan felt anger rising in his chest, but not toward her. Toward himself. He should have seen it earlier. He should have realized why Vanessa suddenly became distant during the merger meetings, why she avoided discussing the audit reports, why fear appeared in her eyes every time Adrian entered a room. They turned you into the scapegoat, she whispered. And I let them. Ethan walked toward the kitchen counter and poured her a glass of water. Vanessa accepted it with trembling fingers. For the first time since the scandal began, the silence between them no longer felt like betrayal. It felt like war approaching. Ethan looked back at the glowing screens filled with evidence against Skybridge Airlines, then directly at Vanessa. They think they grounded me, he said quietly. Outside, thunder rolled across the city skyline as rain hammered against the apartment windows and Vanessa slowly realized Ethan wasn't planning to disappear anymore. The grand ballroom of the International Aviation Ethics Summit in Dubai glittered beneath massive crystal chandeliers as some of the most powerful names in global aviation gathered beneath one roof. Executives, government regulators, investors, journalists, and airline owners filled the enormous hall, their conversations blending into a low hum of confidence and ambition. At the center of it all stood Adrian Cross. The CEO of Skybridge Airlines walked through the crowd like a man untouched by scandal. Cameras flashed around him while reporters fought for quotes about the airline's upcoming international expansion deal. Mr. Cross, are the recent allegations against former executive Ethan Cole affecting investor confidence? Adrian smiled smoothly without slowing his pace. False accusations from a disgruntled former employee don't concern us, he replied. Skybridge has never been stronger. Several reporters nodded while typing rapidly into their phones. Only Adrian knew how fragile his empire truly was. Inside the main auditorium, giant digital screens displayed the summit's slogan, "Integrity above altitude." The irony almost made Vanessa sick. She sat quietly near the back of the hall wearing a dark business suit and sunglasses, trying not to attract attention. Beside her, Ethan Cole remained completely calm, his eyes fixed on the stage where Adrian prepared for the keynote speech. "You still have time to walk away," Vanessa whispered nervously. Ethan didn't look at her. "If we walk away now," he said quietly, "he wins forever." The lights dimmed across the ballroom as the announcer introduced Adrian to thunderous applause. Adrian stepped onto the stage confidently, adjusting his tie before gripping the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began warmly, "the future of aviation depends on transparency, innovation, and public trust." Suddenly, the massive screen behind him flickered. Adrian paused mid-sentence. The audience murmured softly as the presentation glitched again. Then the first document appeared. A classified Skybridge maintenance report marked urgent safety violation. Another screen followed. Then another. Offshore payment records. Secret fuel contracts. Aircraft approval logs signed without inspection. The ballroom erupted into confusion. "What is this?" one investor shouted. Journalists immediately raised cameras toward the stage. Adrian's face drained of color. "Turn that off," he yelled toward the technicians. But the system no longer responded. Audio recordings suddenly blasted through the auditorium speakers. Adrian's own voice echoed across the hall. "Delay the inspections. We save millions if those aircraft stay operational." Gasps spread through the audience. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly as more recordings played. "If Ethan becomes a problem," Adrian's voice continued through the speakers, "we bury him with the audit." Regulators seated near the front exchanged alarmed looks while several airline executives stood from their seats in disbelief. Adrian grabbed the microphone violently. "This is fabricated. Someone shut this down now." A calm voice answered from the back of the ballroom. "No," Ethan said. "Now everyone gets to see the truth." The crowd turned instantly. Whispers exploded across the hall as Ethan Cole walked slowly toward the stage beside Vanessa. Cameras swarmed around them. "Ethan Cole is here." Vanessa heart too. Were they framed? Adrian stared at them like he'd seen ghosts. "You," he hissed. Ethan stepped onto the stage with controlled calm while security guards hesitated, unsure whose orders mattered anymore. "You spent weeks calling me a criminal," Ethan said into the microphone. "But the real threat to aviation safety was standing here the entire time pretending to protect this company." Adrian pointed furiously toward Vanessa. She helped him steal company data. Vanessa finally spoke, her voice shaking but clear enough for the entire ballroom to hear. "No," she said, "I helped expose you." The audience erupted again. Journalists rushed forward so aggressively that hotel security struggled to control the chaos. Government investigators approached the stage while several investors angrily demanded explanations from Skybridge executives seated nearby. Adrian's confidence completely shattered. Sweat rolled down his face as the giant screens continued displaying evidence line after line, transaction after transaction, recording after recording. Ethan looked directly at him. "You thought firing me would protect your empire," he said quietly. Adrian clenched his fists. "You have no idea what you've started." Ethan's expression never changed. "Oh, I know exactly what this is," he replied. Behind them, the summit's massive screen displayed the final document, a confidential approval bearing Adrian Cross's digital signature connected to unsafe international aircraft departures as stunned silence slowly spread through the ballroom. Once again morning sunlight poured through the massive glass walls of the newly opened terminal as passengers moved excitedly through the departure hall of Aurora Air. Large digital screens displayed departure times for flights heading across Europe, Asia, and North America, while employees in dark blue uniforms guided travelers with calm professionalism. 1 year earlier, Ethan Cole had walked out of Skybridge Airlines carrying nothing except a termination letter and a destroyed reputation. Now reporters stood outside Aurora Air's headquarters waiting for interviews about the airline that had become the fastest-growing aviation company in the region. People called it a miracle. Ethan called it accountability. Near the observation windows overlooking the runway, mechanics completed final checks on Aurora Air's newest aircraft while ground crews loaded luggage beneath the bright morning sky. Every inspection was recorded. Every report was transparent. Every employee had authority to halt a flight if something felt unsafe. No shortcuts. No hidden deals. No fear. Vanessa Hart walked through the terminal beside Ethan holding a digital tablet filled with passenger statistics for the company's first international expansion week. "We just crossed 93% customer approval," she said with a smile. "And investors want 3 more routes added before winter." Ethan nodded quietly, though his attention remained fixed on the aircraft outside. The engines of Flight 102 slowly powered up near the runway. For a moment, the sound reminded him of the old days at Skybridge. Endless meetings, political games, executives treating safety like an obstacle to profits. He remembered Adrian Cross standing in that boardroom with absolute confidence, convinced power made him untouchable. But Adrian was now awaiting trial under international aviation fraud charges after multiple governments launched investigations into Skybridge Airlines. The company itself had collapsed within months of the summit exposure. Several executives resigned, others disappeared before authorities could question them, and thousands of former Skybridge employees suddenly found themselves unemployed. That part still bothered Ethan the most. "They're here," Vanessa said softly. Ethan turned toward the terminal entrance. A group of former Skybridge pilots, flight attendants, and maintenance workers walked inside together wearing nervous expressions. Some carried folders containing resumes while others simply looked uncertain about whether they truly belonged there. Aurora Air had invited them personally. One of the mechanics approached Ethan carefully. "Sir, thank you for giving us another chance." Ethan shook the man's hand firmly. "You shouldn't have needed one." The mechanic lowered his eyes. "Most airlines won't even interview anyone connected to Skybridge anymore." Vanessa exchanged a quiet look with Ethan. That stigma was exactly why they created Aurora Air differently. No employee would be punished for the corruption of executives above them. A young woman wearing a trainee badge suddenly approached Ethan near the boarding gate. She looked barely 22 and held a company orientation folder tightly against her chest. "Mr. Cole?" she asked nervously. Ethan smiled slightly. "You can call me Ethan." She hesitated before speaking again. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." The young employee glanced around the busy terminal before lowering her voice. "After everything that happened, after they destroyed your reputation, why did you come back to aviation?" For several seconds, Ethan said nothing. Outside the giant windows, Aurora Flight 102 slowly moved toward the runway while sunlight reflected across the aircraft's polished body. Passengers inside looked forward to vacations, business meetings, reunions, and opportunities waiting on the other side of the world. Most of them would never know how close unsafe greed had once come to destroying lives in the skies above them. Ethan placed his hands in his coat pockets and watched the aircraft carefully. "Because too many good people were forced to suffer while powerful people protected themselves," he said quietly. The young employee listened closely. Ethan looked toward the Aurora Air logo shining brightly across the terminal wall. "This industry forgot that passengers trust us with their lives every time they board an aircraft," he continued. "The moment profit becomes more important than safety, aviation stops being about people." Outside, the aircraft accelerated down the runway. The engines roared louder and louder before the massive jet finally lifted smoothly into the sky. Employees across the terminal paused briefly to watch it rise above the city skyline. Vanessa stepped beside Ethan and smiled as the aircraft disappeared into the clouds while a quiet feeling of victory settled over the terminal and Ethan realized this was no longer about revenge anymore.